I adjusted my simple black dress, feeling distinctly out of place among the crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed walls of Le Maison, Boston's most exclusive restaurant. Not because I couldn't afford it, my net worth would probably buy the entire building, but because my family had specifically chosen this place to make me uncomfortable. Oh, Olivia, my sister Victoria's voice carried across the lobby, dripping with false concern. I didn't think you'd actually come. This place is rather expensive. I caught my reflection in a nearby mirror. No designer labels, no flashy jewelry, just a classic dress and the small pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. Exactly the image I carefully cultivated for the past decade. I'll manage, Victoria, I said quietly, watching her exchange knowing smirks with her husband James. As the maitre d' led us to our table, I could hear Victoria's stage whisper to our mother, "I told you we should have picked somewhere more appropriate for her budget." If they only knew that I owned 40% of the restaurant group that had bought La Maison last year. The annual Morrison family dinner had always been an exercise in humiliation, at least since I'd chosen to leave the family's investment firm 10 years ago to waste my time with that tech startup nonsense, as my father had put it. Victoria, ever the dutiful daughter, had stayed and married James Thompson, now CFO of Morrison Financial. They lived in a mansion in Beacon Hill, drove matching Mercedes, and never missed an opportunity to remind me of my supposed poverty. "So, Olivia," James said as we settled into our seats, his tone condescending, "still working on that little app of yours?" I took a sip of water, remembering the email I'd received that morning about his company's desperate need for private aviation services. Something like that. The truth was far more interesting. My little app, a revolutionary financial technology platform, had been quietly acquired by Google for $4.2 billion 3 years ago. But that was just the beginning. I'd taken that money and built Artemis Capital, a private investment firm specializing in aviation and technology. We operated entirely through shell companies and subsidiaries, with my identity carefully hidden behind layers of corporate structure. The only person who knew the truth was my grandmother, before she passed away last year. "Let them underestimate you," she'd said with a twinkle in her eye. "Sometimes the best revenge is simply waiting for the right moment." "Olivia can't even afford a new car," Victoria was saying to our mother, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "She still drives that old Toyota. Remember when she asked to borrow money for repairs last year?" I remembered. I also remembered signing the papers that same day to acquire a fleet of Gulfstream jets for Artemis Aviation, our newest subsidiary. Speaking of cars, James cut in, straightening his designer tie. "Victoria and I just ordered the new Bentley. Custom everything." He turned to me with a smirk. "What is it like, exactly, taking a bus to work?" "A great way to reduce my carbon footprint," I replied mildly, thinking about the environmentally certified private jet terminal I just built at Logan International. My father cleared his throat. "Now, James, don't be too hard on her. Not everyone can handle the pressures of real finance. At least she's independent." The way he said independent made it sound like a disease. "Oh," Victoria suddenly perked up. "James has exciting news." "Tell them, honey." James puffed up with importance. "Thomson Airways is looking to partner with us. Once they sign, Morrison Financial will handle all their East Coast operations. It's a $1 billion deal." I kept my face carefully neutral. Thomson Airways was one of my companies acquired through Artemis Capital last year. They didn't know that their potential partnership would actually mean working for me. "That's wonderful," I said, buttering a piece of bread. "When's the meeting?" "Tomorrow morning," James boasted. "Their CEO is flying in on their private jet. That's how you know you're dealing with serious money, Olivia. Private jets, not bus passes." If he only knew that the jet belonged to me, or that I'd be watching the meeting through the secure video feed in my office. "I heard their CEO is quite mysterious," my father mused. "Nobody seems to know much about them." "That's business at the highest levels," James said patronizingly. "Something you wouldn't understand, Olivia. It's all about connections, power, real money." Victoria signaled a waiter. "Speaking of money, let's order." "Olivia, they have a lovely house salad that's quite reasonable." "Actually," I said, studying the menu, "I'll have the chef's tasting menu with wine pairings." The table fell silent. The tasting menu cost over $500 per person. "Olivia," my mother said, her voice tight with embarrassment. You can't afford that. Don't worry, I replied calmly. I've been saving up. Victoria's face flushed with anger. This isn't the place to pretend you're something you're not. It's embarrassing. I met her eyes steadily. I'm not pretending anything. Really? James scoffed. The girl who needed a loan to fix her Toyota can suddenly afford a $500 dinner. What's next? You own a private jet too. The irony nearly made me laugh. Just then, James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face suddenly turning serious. Excuse me, I need to take this. He walked to the lobby, but I could still hear his side of the conversation. What do you mean the Thomson Airways CEO canceled? The meeting's in 12 hours. This could ruin everything. When he returned to the table, his face had lost its smugness. Victoria touched his arm, concerned. What's wrong? Nothing, he snapped. Just business. Nothing you'd understand, Olivia. I took another sip of water, thinking about the email I'd send later tonight as Thomson Airways CEO, regretfully informing Morrison Financial that we decided to go with another firm for our East Coast operations. You know, Victoria said, clearly trying to distract from her husband's mood. This restaurant is actually part of the La Maison Group. James and I bought shares in it last month. Didn't we, darling? That's right, James said, recovering some of his arrogance. We own almost 5%. I nodded politely, remembering the board meeting where I'd approved their minor stock purchase through one of my shell companies. How nice for you. The waiter arrived with my wine pairing, a rare vintage that cost more than Victoria's new Bentley. Compliments of the owner, he said with a slight bow. Victoria's face contorted with confusion. There must be some mistake. James and I are shareholders, and we didn't authorize. No mistake, madame, the waiter said smoothly. The owner was quite specific. For Ms. Morrison's table only. All eyes turned to me. I raised a glass in a small toast, enjoying their bewilderment. How generous of them. James's phone buzzed again. Another crisis about tomorrow's meeting, no doubt. He excused himself once more, leaving Victoria to stew in her confusion about the wine. I don't understand, she said to our father. Why would the owner? Probably a mistake, he said firmly. They must think she's someone else. I just smiled and sipped my wine. Tomorrow would be interesting indeed. The next morning, I sat in my private office on the top floor of the Artemis building, watching James pace nervously in the conference room through the security feed. He'd arrived 30 minutes early for the Thomson Airways meeting, desperately trying to salvage what he thought would be the biggest deal of his career. Ms. Morrison? My assistant Julia's voice came through the intercom. Your sister and father just arrived in the lobby. They're here with Mr. Thomson. Of course they were. Victoria never missed a chance to watch her husband's supposed triumphs, and my father probably wanted to remind everyone that his golden son-in-law was the real financial genius of the family. Perfect, I replied. Let's proceed as planned. I opened my laptop and began typing an email that would be delivered in exactly 10 minutes. Dear Mr. Thomson, after careful consideration, Thomson Airways has decided to pursue other options for our East Coast operations. We appreciate Morrison Financial's interest, but feel our corporate cultures may not align. Best regards, Old Morrison CEO, Thomson Airways. I had spent 10 years building my empire in secret, watching my family dismiss and belittle me while I quietly acquired companies, patents, and market share. Today that all would change. Through the feed, I watched more people file into the conference room. Victoria was adjusting James's tie, whispering what I assumed were words of encouragement. My father sat at the table looking smugly confident. Then Julia's voice came again. The Thomson Airways representatives are here. Send them in. I watched the screen as 3 of my top executives entered the conference room. James jumped up, hand extended. Welcome. We've been so looking forward to. Wait, where's your CEO? My Chief Operating Officer, David Chen, smiled politely. Ms. Morrison sends her regrets. She's decided to handle this matter differently. Ms. Morrison? Victoria's voice was sharp with surprise. Right on cue, James's phone pinged. I watched him read the email, his face draining of color. This must be a mistake, he stammered. They're rejecting us? But why? Perhaps, David said calmly, you should ask Olivia. The room fell silent. Victoria let out a nervous laugh. Olivia? What does she have to do with anything? She can barely afford dinner. David pulled out his tablet and pulled up a document. Olivia Morrison, founder and CEO of Artemis Capital, owner of Thomson Airways, La Maison Group, and approximately 60 other companies through various subsidiaries. Current estimated net worth, $8.2 billion. I chose that moment to enter the conference room. The looks on their faces were priceless. Victoria's mouth hung open, her carefully applied lipstick suddenly garish against her pale face. James had collapsed into his chair, staring at me like I was a ghost. My father stood frozen, his hand gripping the back of his chair. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "I believe we need to discuss your professional conduct, James." "This is impossible," Victoria whispered. You drive a Toyota. You borrowed money for repairs." "Actually," I corrected her, "I own the Toyota dealership." The repair story was just entertaining. "But," James found his voice, "but Thomson Airways, the private jet." "Oh yes," I smiled. "The jet you were so impressed by? It's part of my personal fleet. Would you like a tour? It's parked at my private terminal." My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "All this time you've been building an empire." I finished for him. "Yes. While you were all busy mocking my little app, I was quietly becoming one of the largest private investors in the country." I walked to the window, looking out over the city. "The restaurant you bragged about owning 5% of? I own 40%. The office building where Morrison Financial leases space? I bought it last year. That private jet service you desperately need. Just one small part of my aviation division." Victoria had started to cry, her mascara running. "Why didn't you tell us?" I turned back to face them. "Would you have believed me? You were also convinced I was a failure. It was easier to let you think that, well, I built something beyond anything you could imagine. Now see here." My father started, trying to regain his authority as head of this family. "No," I cut him off. "You don't get to pull the family card. Not after 10 years of watching your precious son-in-law and daughter humiliate me at every opportunity." I picked up a folder from the conference table. "In fact, let's talk about Morrison Financial. My team has uncovered some interesting irregularities in your books, James. Care to explain?" James went even paler, if that was possible. Victoria looked at him sharply. "What irregularities?" "Oh, you know," I said casually, "the usual. Inflated profits, hidden losses, a few million here and there that doesn't quite add up." "You've been investigating us?" my father demanded. "Of course, I investigate all potential business partners thoroughly. It's what successful people do, isn't it, James? People with real money and serious connections." I nodded to David, who distributed copies of a detailed report to everyone in the room. "You'll find everything documented here. The questionable trades, the misreported earnings, even that interesting transfer to your private account in the Caymans, James." Victoria snatched the report, her hands shaking as she flipped through it. "James, what is she talking about?" But James just sat there, defeated. He knew every word was true. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "James will resign from Morrison Financial, effective immediately. If he does so quietly, this information stays private. If not," I shrugged, "well, the SEC finds this kind of documentation very interesting." "You can't do this," my father protested weakly. "Actually, I can. And one more thing." I pressed a button on the conference phone. "Julia, please execute Operation Clean Slate." "Right away, Ms. Morrison." "What's Operation Clean Slate?" Victoria asked, her voice trembling. "As of this moment, Artemis Capital is announcing its acquisition of controlling interest in Morrison Financial. We'll be conducting a complete audit and restructuring of the company, starting with the leadership." My father collapsed into his chair. "You're taking over Morrison Financial?" But it's our family legacy." "No," I corrected him. "It was your chance to build a real legacy, but you were too busy playing favorites and ignoring corruption to see what was happening right under your nose." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Victoria, about last night's dinner. I hope you enjoyed that wine. It was from my private cellar. Cost more than your new Bentley." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes. James resigned as planned, though Victoria filed for divorce as soon as she learned the full extent of his financial misconduct. My father took early retirement, unable to face the humiliation of working for his failure daughter. I hired the best forensic accountants to clean up Morrison Financial, rebranded it as part of the Artemis Group, and implemented strict new compliance measures. The company's stock actually rose when the market learned about the change in ownership, especially after analysts realized who was really in charge. 3 months after the confrontation, my mother asked to meet for coffee. She chose a small cafe, not La Maison this time. "I don't understand," she said after we'd sat in awkward silence for a while. "Why live like you were struggling when you were actually a billionaire?" I finished for her. "Because I wanted to see who people really were, how they treated someone they thought was beneath them." It was educational. She had the grace to look ashamed. "We were horrible to you." "Yes," I agreed calmly. "You were. Can you ever forgive us?" I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. "Forgiveness isn't the issue, Mom. Trust is. You all showed me exactly who you were when you thought I had nothing. Why should I trust you now that you know I have everything?" She had no answer for that. A year later, I sat in my private jet, the same one James had been so impressed by, flying back from a business meeting in London. Victoria had moved to Chicago with her new husband, a junior accountant at a small firm. James was working as a car salesman in New Jersey. My father had bought a small condo in Florida, his dreams of dynasty shattered. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Happy birthday, sis. I know I don't deserve it, but I miss you." I looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about forgiveness and family and the true costs of success. Maybe someday we'd find a way to be a real family, one built on respect rather than money and power games. But for now, I was content knowing that I built something extraordinary while they were busy underestimating me. My grandmother would have been proud. "Ms. Morrison?" The flight attendant approached. "We're about to land at your private terminal." I smiled, remembering James's sneer about private jets and serious money. "Thank you," I said. "Oh, and could you make sure my Toyota is ready? I feel like driving myself home today." Sometimes the best revenge isn't just success. It's succeeding so spectacularly that those who doubted you have to live with the knowledge that they never saw your true worth until it was too late. And sometimes, the person they mocked for taking a bus becomes the one who owns the jets they desperately need. That night, I added James' resignation letter to my collection of mementos in my office safe. Next to it sat the dinner receipt from La Maison and a simple handwritten note from my grandmother. "Let them underestimate you, my dear. Success is sweetest when they never see it coming." How right she had been.